The Final Quest, a vision by Joyner, from Morning Star Publications. We came to a level that opened up into a garden. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Over the entrance of this garden was written, "The Father's Unconditional Love." This entrance was so glorious and inviting that we could not resist entering. The beautiful garden. As soon as I entered the garden, I saw a tree that I knew was the tree of life. It was in the middle of this garden, and it was still guarded by angels of awesome power and authority. When I looked at them, they looked back. They seemed friendly, as if they were expecting us. I looked back, and there was now a host of other warriors in the garden. This gave us all courage, and because of the angels' demeanor, we decided to pass them and get to the tree. One of the angels called out, "Those who make it to this level know the Father's love and can eat of the tree." I did not realize how hungry I was. When I tasted the fruit, it was better than anything I had ever tasted. Yet it was also familiar somehow. It brought pleasant memories of such things as sunshine, rain, beautiful fields, and the sun setting over the ocean. Even more, it reminded me of the people I loved. With every bite, I loved everything and everyone more. Then my enemies started coming to mind, and I loved them too. The feeling was soon greater than anything I'd ever experienced, greater even than the peace we felt when we first reached the level of Galatians 2:20. Then I heard a voice of the Lord saying, "This is now your daily bread. It will never be withheld from you. You may eat as much and as often as you like. There is no end to my love." I looked up into the tree to see where the voice had come from, and I saw that the tree was filled with pure white eagles. They had the most beautiful, penetrating eyes I had ever seen. They were looking at me as if waiting for instructions. "They will do your bidding," one of the angels said. "These eagles eat snakes." "Go," I told the eagles, "devour the shame that has bound your brothers." They opened their wings, and a great wind came and lifted them into the air. The eagles filled the sky with a blinding glory. Even as high as we were, I could hear the sounds of terror from the enemy camp at the sight of the eagles descending. The Lord Jesus Christ then appeared right in our midst. He took the time to greet each one personally, congratulating us for reaching the top of the mountain. Then he said to us, "I must now share with you what I shared with your brothers after my resurrection, the message of my kingdom. The enemy's most powerful army has now been put to flight, but not destroyed. Now it is time for us to march forth with the gospel of my kingdom. The eagles have been released and will go with us. We will take arrows from every level, but remember, I am your sword and your captain. It is now time for the sword of the Lord to be unsheathed." I then turned and saw that the entire army of the Lord was standing in the garden. There were men, women, and children from all races and nations, each carrying their banners, which moved in the wind with perfect unity. I knew that nothing like this had ever been seen on earth before. Although the enemy had many more armies and fortresses throughout the earth, I knew that none could stand before this great army of God. Almost under my breath, I said, "This must be the day of the Lord." To my amazement, the whole host then answered in an awesome thunder, "The day of the Lord of hosts has come." Reflecting on the dream. Months later, I sat pondering this dream. Alarmingly, certain events and conditions in the church had already seemed to parallel what I had seen when the hordes from hell had begun to march. I was then reminded of Abraham Lincoln. The only way he could become a great emancipator and the preserver of the Union was to be willing to fight a civil war. Not only did he have to fight it, but he had to be determined not to compromise until the victory was complete. Lincoln also had to have the grace to fight the bloodiest war in our history without demonizing the enemy with propaganda. If he had done that, he might have been able to galvanize the resolve of the North much faster, facilitating a quicker military victory. However, it would have made the reunion after the war much more difficult. Because he was truly fighting to preserve the Union, Lincoln never made the men and women of the South the enemy, but rather the evil that held them in bondage. A great spiritual civil war now looms before the church. Many will do everything they can to avoid it. This is understandable and even noble. However, compromise will never maintain a lasting peace. It will only make the ultimate conflict that much more difficult when it comes. And come it will. The Lord is now preparing courageous leaders who will be willing to fight a spiritual civil war in order to set men free. The main issue, as in the American Civil War, will be slavery versus freedom. The secondary issue, which will be the primary issue for some, will be money. Just as the American Civil War at times looked like it would destroy the entire nation, that which is coming upon the church will sometimes appear as if it will bring the end of the church. However, just as the United States not only survived, but went on to become the most powerful nation on earth, the same is going to happen to the church. The church will not be destroyed, but the institutions and doctrines that have kept men in spiritual slavery will be. Even after this, perfect justice in the church will not be attained overnight. There will still be struggles for women's rights and setting the church free from racism and exploitation. These are all causes that must be confronted. Yet in the midst of the coming spiritual civil war, faith, hope, and love, and the kingdom of God they stand upon, will begin to be seen as they have never been seen before. This will begin drawing people to the kingdom. God's government is about to be demonstrated as greater than any human government. Let us always remember that with the Lord, 1,000 years is as a day. He can do in us, in one day, what we may think would take 1,000 years. The work of liberating and raising up the church will be accomplished much quicker than we may think is humanly possible. However, we are not talking about human possibilities. We stood in the garden of God under the tree of life. It seemed that the entire army was there. Many of them were kneeling before the Lord Jesus. He had just given us a charge to return to the battle for the sake of our brothers who are still bound and for the world that he loved. It was both a wonderful and terrible command. It was wonderful because it came from him. It was terrible because it meant that we would have to leave his manifest presence and the garden that was more beautiful than any place we had ever been to before. To leave all of this and to go into battle again seemed incomprehensible. The Lord continued his exhortation. I have given you spiritual gifts and powers, and an increased understanding of my word and my kingdom. But the greatest weapon you have been given is the Father's love. As long as you walk in my Father's love, you will never fail. The fruit of this tree is the Father's love, which is manifested in me. This love, which is in me, must be your daily bread. In this setting of such beauty and glory, it did not seem that the Lord was appearing in his glory. In fact, his appearance was rather ordinary. Even so, the grace with which he moved and spoke made him the most attractive person I had ever seen. He was beyond human definition in dignity and nobility. It was easy to understand why he is everything that the Father loves and esteems. Seeing him this way, so full of truth and grace, made it seem that nothing but truth and grace should ever matter. As I ate the fruit from the tree of life, the thought of every good thing I had ever known filled my soul. When Jesus spoke, it was the same, only magnified. All I wanted to do was to stay in this place and listen to him. I remembered how I had once thought it must be boring for those angels who do nothing but worship him continually before the throne. Now I knew that there was nothing more wonderful or exhilarating than we would ever do than simply to worship him. Such worship was what we were created for, and it would surely be the best part of heaven. I could not imagine how wonderful it would be if all the heavenly choir were added. It is hard to believe that I had struggled so much with boredom during worship services. I knew that it was only because I had been completely out of touch with this heavenly reality during those times. I was almost overwhelmed with the desire to go back and make up those times during worship services when I had allowed my mind to wander or had occupied myself with other things. The desire to express my adoration for him became almost insatiable. I had to praise him. As I opened my mouth, I was shocked by the spontaneous worship that erupted from the entire army at the same time. I had almost forgotten that anyone else was there. Yet we were all in perfect unity. The glorious worship that followed could not be described in human language. As we worshiped, a golden glow began to emanate from the Lord. Then, silver appeared around the gold. After that, we were enveloped in colors, the richness of which I have never seen with my natural eyes. With this glory, I entered a realm of emotion that I have never experienced before. Somehow I understood that this glory had been there all along. But when we focused on him the way we did in worship, we began to see more of his glory. The more intensely we worshiped, the more glory we beheld. If this was heaven, it was much, much better than I had ever dreamed. His dwelling place. I had no idea how long this worship lasted. It could have been minutes, or it could have been months. There was just no way to measure time in that kind of glory. I closed my eyes because the glory I was seeing with my heart was as great as what I was seeing with my physical eyes. When I opened my eyes, I was surprised to see that the Lord was not there any longer, but a troop of angels was standing where he had been. One of them approached me and said, "Close your eyes again." When I did, I beheld the glory of the Lord, and this was no small relief. Now that I had experienced the glory, I knew I simply could not live without it. Then the angel explained, "What you see with the eyes of your heart is more real than what you see with your physical eyes." I had made that statement myself many times, but how little I had walked in it. The angel continued, "It was for this reason that the Lord told his first disciples it was better for him to go away so the Holy Spirit could come. The Lord dwells within you. You have taught this many times, but now you must live it, for you have eaten from the tree of life." The angel then began to lead me back to the gate. I protested that I did not want to leave. Seeming surprised, the angel took me by the shoulders and looked me in the eyes. This is when I recognized him. It was wisdom. "You never have to leave this garden," he assured me. "This garden is in your heart, because the Creator himself is within you. You have desired the best part, to worship and sit in His presence forever, and it will never be taken from you. But you must take it from here to where it is most needed. I knew he was right. I then looked past him to the tree of life. I had a compulsion to grab all the fruit I could before leaving. Knowing my thoughts, wisdom gently shook me. No, even this fruit, gathered in fear, would go bad. This fruit and this tree are within you, because He is in you. You must believe. Seeing with eyes closed, I closed my eyes and tried to see the Lord again, but I couldn't. When I opened my eyes, wisdom was still staring at me. With great patience, he continued, "You have tasted of the heavenly realm, and no one ever wants to go back to the battle once they do. No one ever wants to leave the manifest presence of the Lord. After the Apostle Paul came here, he struggled for the rest of his life as to whether he should stay and labor for the sake of the church, or return here to enter into his inheritance. But his inheritance was magnified the longer he stayed and served on earth. Now that you have the heart of a true worshiper, you will always want to be here, and you can, whenever you enter into true worship. The more focused you are on Him, the more glory you will see, regardless of where you are." Wisdom's words had finally calmed me. Again, I closed my eyes just to thank the Lord for this wonderful experience and the life that He had given me. As I did, I started to see His glory again, and all the emotion of the previous worship experience flooded my soul. The Lord's words to me were so loud and clear that I was sure they were audible. "I will never leave you or forsake you." "Lord, forgive my unbelief," I responded. "Please help me never to leave or forsake you." This was both a wonderful and trying time. Here, the real world was not real, and the spiritual realm was so much more real that I could just not imagine going back to the other. I was gripped with both wonder and a terrible fear that I might wake up at any moment and find that it was all just a dream. Wisdom understood what was going on inside of me. "You are dreaming," he said. "But this dream is more real than what you think of as real. The Father gave men dreams to help them see the door to His dwelling place. He will only dwell in men's hearts, and dreams can be a door to your heart, which will lead you to Him. That is why angels so often appear to men in their dreams. In dreams, they can bypass the fallen mind of man and go straight to his heart." As I opened my eyes, wisdom was still gripping my shoulders. "I am the primary gift that has been given to you for your work," he said. "I will show you the way and keep you on it, but only love will keep you faithful. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but the highest wisdom is to love Him." Then wisdom released me and started to walk towards the gate. I followed with ambivalence. I remembered the exhilaration of the battle and the climb up the mountain, and though it was compelling, there was just no comparison to the presence of the Lord and the worship I had just experienced. Leaving this would be the greatest sacrifice I had ever made. Then I remembered how it was all inside of me, and I was amazed that I could forget this so quickly. It was as if a great battle was raging within me between what I saw with my physical eyes and what I saw with my heart. The third heaven. Having moved forward so that I was walking beside wisdom, I asked him, "I've prayed for 25 years to be caught up into the third heaven, like the Apostle Paul. Is this the third heaven?" "This is part of it," he replied, "but there is much more." "Will I be allowed to see more?" I asked. You will see much more. I am taking you to see more now," he replied. I started thinking of the book of Revelation. Was John's revelation part of the third heaven? I asked. Part of John's revelation was from the third heaven, but most of it was from the second heaven. The first heaven was before the fall of man. The second heaven is the spiritual realm during the reign of evil upon the earth. The third heaven is when the love and domain of the Father will again prevail over the earth through the King. What was the first heaven like? I inquired, strangely feeling a cold chill as I asked. Is wisdom not to be concerned about that now? Wisdom responded with increased seriousness, as my question seemed to jolt him. Wisdom is to seek to know the third heaven, just as you have. There is much more to know about the third heaven than you can know in this life. Yet it is the third heaven, the kingdom, that you must preach in this life. In the ages to come you will be told about the first heaven, but it is not profitable for you to know about it now. When I resolved to remember the cold chill I had just felt, wisdom nodded, which I knew to be an affirmation of that thought. What a great companion you are, I had to say as I realized the valuable gift that this angel was. You really will keep me on the right path. I will indeed, he replied. The other half of love. I was sure I felt love coming from this angel, which was unique since I had never felt this from the other angels. They usually showed their concern more out of duty than love. Wisdom responded to my thoughts as if I had spoken them out loud. It is wisdom to love, and I could not be wisdom if I did not love you. It is also wisdom to behold the kindness and the severity of God. It is wisdom to love Him and to fear Him. You are in deception if you do otherwise. This is the next lesson that you must learn, he said with unmistakable earnestness. I do know that, and I've taught it many times, I responded, feeling for the first time that maybe wisdom did not fully know me. I have been your companion for a very long time, and I know your teachings, wisdom replied. You are now about to learn what some of your own teachings mean. As you have said many times, it is not by believing in your mind, but in your heart that results in righteousness. I apologized, feeling a bit ashamed at having questioned wisdom. He graciously accepted my apology. It was then that I realized I had been questioning and challenging him most of my life, and often to my harm. Just as there is a time to plant and a time to reap, wisdom continued, there are times to adore the Lord, and there are times to honor Him with the greatest fear and respect. It is wisdom to know the time for each. True wisdom knows the times and seasons of God. I brought you here because it was time to worship the Lord in the glory of His love. This is what you needed the most after such a battle. I am now taking you to another place because it is time for you to worship Him in the fear of His judgment. Until you know both, there is a danger that we can be separated from each other. Do you mean that if I had stayed back there, in that glorious worship, I would have lost you? I asked in disbelief. Yes, I would have always visited you when I could, but we would have rarely crossed paths. Although it is hard to leave such glory and peace, that is not the whole revelation of the King. He is both a lion and a lamb. To the spiritual children, He is the lamb. To the maturing, He is the lion. To the fully mature, He is both the lion and the lamb. Again, I know you understand this, but you have known it primarily in your mind. Soon you will know it in your heart, for you are about to experience the judgment seat of Christ. Returning to the battle. Before leaving the gates to the garden, I asked Wisdom if I could just sit for a while to ponder all that I had just experienced. "Yes, you should do this," he replied, "but I have a better place for you to do it." I followed Wisdom out of the gates, and we began to go down the mountain. To my surprise, the battle was still going on, but not as intensely as it was when we ascended. There were still arrows of accusation and slander flying about on the lower levels, but most of the enemy horde that remained was furiously attacking the great white eagles. The eagles were easily prevailing. We kept ascending until we were almost at the bottom. Just above the levels of salvation and sanctification was the level thanksgiving and praise. I remember this level very well, because one of the greatest attacks of the enemy came when I first tried to reach it. Once we had gotten here, the rest of the climb was much easier, and when an arrow penetrated our armor, healing came much faster. As soon as my enemies spotted me on this level, they could not see Wisdom, a shower of arrows began to rain down on me. I knocked them down with my shield so easily that the enemy quit shooting. Their arrows were now almost gone, and they could not afford to waste them. The soldiers that were still fighting from this level looked at me in astonishment, with a deference that made me very uncomfortable. It was then I first noticed that the glory of the Lord was emanating from my armor and shield. I told these soldiers to climb to the top of the mountain without stopping, and they too would see the Lord. As soon as they agreed to go, they saw Wisdom. They started to fall down and worship him, but he restrained them and sent them on their way. The faithful. I was filled with love for these soldiers, many of whom were women and children. Their armor was a mess, and they were covered in blood. But they had not given up. In fact, they were still cheerful and encouraged. I told them that they were deserving more honor than I was, because they had borne the greatest burden of the battle and had held their ground. They seemed not to believe me, but appreciated that I would say it. However, I really felt that it was true. Every level on the mountain had to be occupied, or the vultures that were left would come and desecrate it with vomit and excrement until it was difficult to stand on. Most of the ledges were occupied by soldiers I recognized to be from different denominations or movements, which emphasized the truth of that level they were defending. I was embarrassed by the attitude I had maintained towards some of these groups. I had considered them out of touch and backslidden at best. But here they were fighting faithfully against a terrible onslaught of the enemy. Their defense of these positions had probably enabled me to keep climbing as I had. Some of these levels were situated so that there was a good view of the mountain and the battlefield. But some were so isolated that the soldiers on them could only see their own position. They seemed unaware of the rest of the battle that was raging, or the rest of the army that was also fighting the battle. They were so wounded from the accusations and slander that they would resist anyone who came down to them from a higher level to encourage them to climb higher. However, when some came down from the top, reflecting the glory of the Lord, the wounded warriors listened, most of them with great joy. Soon a number of them began to climb with courage and resolve. As I beheld all of this, Wisdom did not say much, but he seemed very interested in my reactions. Reality discovered. I watched as many soldiers who had been to the top began descending to all the levels in order to relieve those who were taking their stand on those truths. As they did, each level began to shine with the glory they carried. Soon the whole mountain was shining with a glory that was blinding to the vultures and demons that were left. After a time, there was so much glory on the mountain that it began to have the same feel as the garden. I started thanking and praising the Lord, and immediately I was in His presence again. It was hard to contain the emotion and glory that I felt when I did this. The experience became so intense that I stopped. Wisdom was standing beside me. Putting his hand on my shoulder, he said, "You enter His gates with thanksgiving, His courts with praise." "But that was so real," I exclaimed. "I felt as if I were there again." "You were there, indeed," Wisdom replied. "It has not gotten more real, but you have. Just as the Lord told the thief on the cross, 'Today you will be with me in paradise.' You can enter paradise at any time. The Lord, His paradise, and this mountain are all abiding in you, because He is in you. What were but foretastes before are now a reality to you, because you have climbed the mountain. The reason you can see me, and others can't, is not because I have entered your realm, but because you have entered mine. This is the reality that the prophets knew, which gave them great boldness, even when they stood alone against armies. They saw the heavenly host that was for them, not just the earthly one arrayed against them." The deadly trap. I then looked over the carnage below and the slowly retreating demonic army. Behind me, more of the glorious warriors were constantly taking their places on the mountain. I knew that we were now strong enough to attack and destroy what was left of this enemy horde. "Not yet," said Wisdom. "Look over there." I looked in the direction in which he was pointing, but I had to shield my eyes from the glory emanating from my own armor to see anything. Then I caught a glimpse of some movement in a small valley. I could not make out what I was seeing, because the glory shining from my armor made it difficult to see into the darkness. I asked Wisdom if there was anything that I could cover my armor with so I could see it. He then gave me a very plain mantle to put on. "What is this?" I inquired, a little insulted by its drabness. "Humility," said Wisdom. "You will not be able to see very well without it." Reluctantly, I put it on, and I immediately saw many things I could not see before. I looked towards the valley and the movement I had seen. To my astonishment, there was an entire division of the evil horde that was waiting to ambush anyone who ventured from the mountain. "What army is that?" I asked. "And how did they escape the battle intact?" "That is pride," exclaimed Wisdom. "That is the hardest enemy to see after you have been in the glory. Those who refuse to put on this cloak will suffer much at the hands of that most devious enemy." As I looked back at the mountain, I saw many of the glorious warriors crossing the plain to attack the remnant of the evil horde. None of them were wearing the cloaks of humility, and they had not seen the enemy that was ready to attack them from their rear. I started to run out to stop them, but Wisdom restrained me. "You cannot stop this," he said. "Only the soldiers who wear this cloak will recognize your authority. Come with me. There is something else that you must see before you can help lead in this great battle that is to come." The foundation of glory. Wisdom led me down the mountain to the very lowest level, which was named salvation. "You see this as the lowest level," declared Wisdom. "But this is the foundation of the whole mountain. In any journey, the first step is the most important, and is usually the most difficult. Without salvation, there would be no mountain." I was appalled by the carnage on this level. Every soldier was badly wounded, but none of them were dead. Multitudes were barely clinging to the edge. Many seemed ready to fall off, but none did. Angels were everywhere, ministering to the soldiers with such great joy that I had to ask, why are they so happy? These angels have beheld the courage that it took for these to hold on. They might not have gone any farther, but neither did they give up. They will soon be healed. Then they will behold the glory of the rest of the mountain, and they will begin to climb. These will be great warriors for the battle to come. But won't they be better off to climb the mountain with the rest of us? I protested, seeing their present condition. It would have been better off for them, but not for you. By staying here, they kept most of your enemies occupied, and that made it easier for you to climb. Very few from the higher levels ever reached out to help others come to the mountain, but these did. Even when barely clinging to the mountain themselves, they would reach out to pull others up. In fact, most of the mighty warriors were led to the mountain by these faithful ones. These who stayed and faithfully fought on the level of salvation are no less heroes than the ones who made it to the top. They brought great joy to heaven by leading others to salvation. It was for this reason that all the angels in heaven wanted to come minister to them, but only the most honored were permitted. Again, I felt shame for my previous attitude towards these great saints. Many of us had scorned them as we climbed to the higher levels. They had made many mistakes during the battle, but they had also displayed more of the shepherd's heart than the rest of us. The Lord would leave the 99 to go after the one who was lost. These had stayed in the place where they could still reach the lost, and they paid a dear price for it. I too wanted to help, but did not know where to start. Wisdom then said, "It is right for you to want to help, but you will help most by going on to what you have been called to do. These will all be healed and will climb the mountain. They can now climb faster because of you and the others who went before them, both destroying the enemy and making the way. They will join you again in the battle. These are the fearless ones who will never retreat before the enemy." The power of pride.